Hey everyone, welcome to the 21st episode of the Crush Cash Game series on my YouTube channel. Thank you for joining me. As always, if you haven't taken a minute to subscribe to my channel, please do so. I'm going to be playing some high stakes action this week. 4 tables of 5-10. Looks like it's a brand new session, so I don't really have any information on our opponents yet. Just gonna try to play it by ear. At the top right table, I would think that the 5 seat is not going to be, he's got about less than a 50% big blind stack, so I would single him out as probably a weak spot. There doesn't appear to be many other ones across the table, so just going to have to wait and see. The most important thing for me at the beginning of my sessions is trying to identify where the money is going to come from. In pretty much all aspects of life, I think there's a Pareto's law where 80% of our profits are going to come from 20% of the people that we play against. And so it's very crucial identifying that 20%. And then once we have them identified, we want to figure out the best way to proceed, the best way to penetrate their weaknesses and do our best to make money. Some guys who are weak players, they play weak in different ways. Some guys who lose a ton, they are maniacal and they go crazy. Some guys are too passive and call off. And it's just up to us to figure out how these people make mistakes and then capitalize on it. Bet 3-betting at the bottom left. I felt like he shouldn't have a super ton of hands in his check raise range that are just really willing to get it in right there. I think he's going to check raise this pretty light. A lot of players tend to check back their top pair type hands when they raise on the button in position to go for a pot control line and then get a bet on the turn out of hands that have like little to no equity. So I would expect players who are more advanced to recognize that tendency and go ahead and go for check raises when they expect us to check back a lot of our top pair range. Meaning, when we bet, we're not going to have very much. And somebody who's observant is going to take advantage of that by raising us. So the only way we can really combat it is, I guess there's 2 ways. We can flat the flop and float them. Although a lot of times they're going to continue betting on the turn, especially versus what they perceive to not be a super strong range of hands. And then in order to win the pot, we're going to have to put a 4th bet in the turn. I really like bet 3-betting if we're going to bluff. We put the 3rd bet in on the flop, pretty much put him at a decision for the rest of his stack right there. And if he ships it, no big deal. We just fold. If he calls, then we give up. Didn't really see the action at the bottom right. I would say that with the 3 seat using that sizing, they're setting up a river shove. The guy on the button, the 6 seat, is apt to know that. So it's very, when you size your turn bets in that way, with half pot size bet on the turn, we're really putting their entire stack at risk, and they know that. Especially on a dry board like Jack, 5, it's so unlikely to not many draws that can connect on the river that are going to change much. So the 3 seat is a very good bet to basically put the 6 seat's entire stack at risk. If he's bluffing, I really love that sizing. The 6 seat appears as if he, I mean, it's only 4 hands, so there's really no way to know, but he might be a spot. He might be a weak player, and we'll just have to see, but it's something to keep our eyes on. Going to be flatting the deuces. It's pretty straightforward. The ace-8 at the bottom left, this is a spot where the small blind is going to be 3-betting a little too much in my opinion. So we're going to go ahead and cold 4-bet it. If he opts the ship or the button opts the ship, then we have a very easy fold. Very small check raise on the board at the top left. I don't really know what that means, especially on a board that's more likely to hit our range than his. Going to be just getting it in with the queens at the top right. I feel like with a lot of his sets and his 2 pairs and stuff like that, he's just going to be raising the flop. There's too many cards that can scare him, that can kill his action on the turn. So with that being said, I would think he's got a range of 7s, 8s, 10s, jacks a lot of the time. Opening under the gun, 8-9 suited. Reasonable as far as I'm concerned. Going for a limp raise with the ace-deuce off at the bottom right. Okay, so we flop top pair against our mark from earlier on. He bets the half pot button. That's exactly half pot if you consider the rake. We check to him because we feel like he's probably going to be stabbing at this board very often, even when he has hands that are not doing very well against us at all. We get a pretty good run out where we make quads. No real reason to bet the river. I would think that he's gonna think we're gonna bet our value on the river first to act, and it's a good spot for him to maybe attempt a bluff. And also, with a short stack like that, a guy playing $420, the psychology of the situation is kind of interesting to me because the money that's in the middle, that's in the pot, means something to him. So I always feel like when the money's important to the player, he's going to take a more aggressive action, especially when he feels like he doesn't have a way to win the pot. So I want to give those guys an opportunity to try to bluff as much as I can. As you can see, he had a gutter with unders on the flop and called it off on the river with the board. And kind of going back to the psychology of allowing him to bet, it's just an important concept that I feel gets overlooked sometimes. If we bet, then he can concede and it's not that big of a deal. But if we check to him, like on the flop, he's going to see that as an opportunity to turn his hand that doesn't have a very good chance of winning into something profitable. And a lot of times they just take that opportunity. Pretty straightforward with the kings. The guy who is 3-betting 22%, playing 88% of hands. Obviously, we're never folding kings 100 bigs deep, especially against this guy. And I would say he had a pretty good hand for this situation. He had the goods when he needed to have the goods. And that's just very, very, very unlucky on our end. Running kings into aces against anybody's tough, especially running kings into aces against a guy playing 88% of his hands, raising 60% and 3-betting 30% is just going to be annoying. We have blockers at the bottom right. The small c-bet on the flop gives us a great opportunity to bluff. Getting a really good price on our bluff. If we get called, we're just going to give up. It's there's just really nothing else we can do. I feel like if we continue firing when our bluff doesn't go through, we're just going to run into hands that aren't folding way too often. We're going to invest significant amounts of our stack into a pretty hopeless situation. So, we did get there on the river. Now we're going to go for a value bet. Our plan changed a little against this queen jacks, king jacks, jack tens. At the bottom left, interesting spot developed. We 3-bet the flop, got called, and heading into the river. Villain did not opt to fire his last shell, more than likely going for a float on the flop on an ace-high board. Again, maybe not expecting us to bet an ace-high board with our ace-kings and be a little bit more bluff-heavy. So, yeah, 7-4 suited. I would call that a pretty legitimate float. The lesson with these hands on the ace-high boards, I believe, in this episode is just going to be, it's always imperative to get into the heads of your opponents, to know what they're thinking, and when you know what they're thinking, we're going to combat whatever plan they come up with. And so these guys are, they're very astute. Their observational skills are at a high level. So we have to think how they think and then counteract it. I think the same thing. When somebody bets on an ace-high board, I think that generally their range is imbalanced. They're not betting with their value hands as often as they should. They're checking back to take pot control lines. And so a lot of times they'll get a check raise out of me, or they'll get a float out of me in situations where I'm just ready to exploit them because I feel as if people are playing hands, one way. So at the top left, we got a flush draw against, Mr. Crazy. Do we raise the flop with our flush draw? I don't know. I think for sure we're going to be jamming here. He's going to be calling the turn very light. He doesn't necessarily have to have a 10. I think we might get looked up if he does have a 10. But I think he's got so many other random things in his range just because he's playing so many hands. His instant pot bet on the flop, the way he instantly called the turn just doesn't really strike me as being super strong. And against a guy like this, I think the money's going to be important. The size of the bet is going to have an effect on him. So I would much rather put in the 700 than just put in 330 or something like that. I think 330 gets called much lighter than the all-in. Another psychological aspect of it too is when a guy's winning, he just got aces against kings, he just doubled up. Players who are not so great really like protecting their wins and don't like putting their wins in jeopardy with a super marginal hand. So three betting at the top right, can't say I really love it. I would have much rather flatted with the queen jack and then exerted pressure post flop. If we're going to be three betting versus a min open in this spot, I like doing it a little bit more polarized with the bottom of my range and then the very top of my range. I think a hand like queen jack just dominates so many of the hands in position that he's going to be raising us with that I think it's a little unnecessary to three bet. Checking back the turn, double pair board. We block a lot of the tens. I'm not exactly sure what the overbet means. He's not going to really feel like we have a lot of tens. Does the overbet, is it just trying to fold out a lot of my ace highs? Is it trying to look fishy and get called by my ace highs? It's hard to tell. One factor that you have to think about in spots like that is what is the villain's perception of me? If I'm capable of making really big calls, thinking through, if I'm a suspicious person who's prone to calling, then I would say his bluff frequency is going to be way less there than if he feels like I'm more cautious. Even now, after folding the hand, I don't know. I don't know what his thought process was. And I don't know whether I made the right decision or not folding queen high. Calling with king queen out of position at the bottom left. This is when he doesn't c-bet this particular board, then I feel as if he just doesn't have anything, and that's a board that hits me very often. So he's not willing to risk c-betting on that board. He's just got a zero equity type hand that we can bet and win on the turn like a super high % of the time. I would look that hand up with the queen jack because I'm very curious about it, but Bovada appears to be down right now, so I can't really do anything. Maybe I'll post it in the notes afterwards. If somebody would be so kind to remind me in the comments, because I have a tendency to think these things are great ideas and have great intentions, and then I just forget. So now let's do a little check of the fish on our tables. Obviously the 5 seed at the top left is a huge whale. Great value. New guy at the top right, the 414 stack. Don't really have much info on him yet, but going to assume that he's not going to be the strongest of players. Not c-betting with the 8s on the queen high board. I think the queen hits a lot of the players' flatting range for raises pre. I think we're going to face resistance. The 5 seat you know, when we let the 3-seat bet last to act, that really tells us a lot because he knows that the 5-seat's still in the pot and the 5-seat's likely to call. The 5-seat's, even though his fold to c-bet's pretty high, the 5-seat's likely to do something kind of ridiculous. So the fact that he's betting 4 ways, we just have to give him credit for something that either has great equity against our 8s or just has our 8s drawing pretty close to dead. Had it checked through in the flop and the turn came a low card and then it checked to us again, we're going to be betting the turn because expecting anybody that has a better hand than us to bet 4 ways on that type of board. We should for sure be 3-betting the 7s. If the button 3-bet, we would be 4-betting the button. We're going to expect that the button's 3-betting super light in this spot against this particular player. So villain doesn't bet the flop after we 3-bet him, doesn't bet the turn, pots the river, and we pay it off. I don't love it, I have to say. I think we can fold the river, as sick as that is, considering he's playing 90% of hands super aggressively. I think with a guy like this, if he does bluff, he's going to be bluffing the flop, and if he doesn't bluff the flop, he's for sure going to be betting the turn. He's not going to be able to keep himself in check on 2 streets. The fact that he let it get to the river and then opted to bet just really makes me feel like he has an ace. It's a much that story is much easier to believe that he has an ace than if he would have actually just potted the flop. 4-handed at the top right, 3-betting out of the small blind, and then getting 4-bet. Our 3-bet's pretty high. The 4-seed's 3-bet is very high as well. 9s is probably a little too strong of a hand to just be folding right there. It is a little difficult because of the short stack raising under the gun. We don't know his fold. You know, the 4-seed has no idea what his fold frequency is going to be there, and he committed himself to an all-in against the 5-seed if the 5-seed opts to shove, which I guess factors into our decision of folding the 9s. It's still, I still want to know what he had. So again, that's another hand that I plan on looking up. Five-seat bets pot on the 4-diamond runout. It's always hard for me to, you know, how does he have many king of diamonds in his range here? Which is obviously what he's repping. We have a good amount of nut flushes in our range. The fact that he's betting pot, you know, makes me tend to believe that he does have some high diamond. But if he does have the king of diamonds, why is he betting pot? Like, he has the nuts. The best I can have is the second nuts, and more than likely I have like the 7th nuts. Why not bet 70? 70 accomplishes the same thing as pot, and is likely 70 is just more likely to get a loose call. Queen 10 at the bottom left. Going to be tripling on this board. He's going to tell us on the turn whether or not he has a hand that he's willing to raise with. The 5 pairing is not exactly the greatest of cards for us. And that's unfortunate. Very unlikely that he shipped the river with like a 5-6 type hand. more likely that he flopped a set and gambled on 2 streets. I would say it's probably unlikely that he had 2 pair. I think not raising 2 pair on the turn is just going to be a mistake. There are some bluffs, I guess, that he could have, hoping to fold out our overpairs. And, you know, maybe he has 5-6 or ace-5 and is opting to ship the river for value after calling the flop and turn. Still don't mind our triple barrel on that board. I think the success rate is going to be pretty high. Opening queen jack suited under the gun at the bottom left. We block king jack and king queen. I would say villain's likely to peel lighter on the button. So if we do face resistance, it's just going to depend on the villain how we proceed. I do think, you know, we're probably going to get floated there some percent of the time. The way that I combat a float with a hand like queen jack, it's a low equity type hand. We have a gutter. When he does flat the flop, I like going for a check raise on the turn. If he ships over us, you know, we lose the equity of a gutter. Not much lost. Versus if we have a flush draw or some kind of combo draw like that, and we check raise a turn and it gets shipped over the top of us, we really feel kind of gross. Like, we want to realize that equity. We want to see the river with those types of hands. So shutting ourselves out by reopening the betting on the turn is, in a lot of cases, going to be a mistake, unless we just know our opponent is never shipping the turn. Pretty incredible at the top left table that the 5 seed has managed to increase his voluntarily put money into pot percentage since we got it in with our kings against them. I think it was at 86 then, now he's at 92. He's going up. I think this is a great spot for the villain to 4-bet us at the top right. With our particular hand, I think shoving is just going to be a spew, but I would like to shove there somewhat light. Jacks for sure, just for sure getting jacks in. Tens is on the bubble for me, probably getting tens in as well. Looks like we got a couple minutes left in this video. I want to thank everybody for listening to me, like always. If you're especially curious about any of the hands that I talked about, just leave me a comment on this video and I will reply to you. I read all my comments, I read all my emails, I read everything that's sent in. And I take it into consideration as well. So with the ace-6, again, we opted to peel against a guy opening super light. Going to be pretty hard for us to get called on this particular board. Opted for a very tiny bet, maybe should have went smaller. Ace-Jack suited, we're going to peel at the top left because the 5 seat is so crazy. We got to expect that the 1 seat is going to be 3-betting very light. I don't like this $200 peel with Ace-Jack. I think we should have just shoved. Like, this hand, I think we should have just shoved the flop with our gutter ball and backdoor hearts. But I will say, when the 1 seed ships the turn, he's just got value all day long. Our thought process for calling the flop had to be that the 1 seed's just firing it way too often. On a suited king-queen board, I don't know if that's the case or not. Now that I'm really thinking about it, you can make a case for just folding the flop. I guess I kind of got a little carried away just because of the 5 seed, whose VP continues to grow at 93%. One thing to take into consideration too is the 1 seed at the top left has only played 11 hands, so maybe he's not aware of the madness of the 5 seed, which is going to make his ranges there much tighter, make our float much worse, even make our pre-flop call worse. Although even at anonymous tables, you never really know, like, if, maybe somebody knows that guy and called him and told him there was a complete lunatic playing, and so he knows who the spot is coming into the table. Like, I would say, I don't know how common that is. I know it's definitely possible. Or it's possible that he just had a table open and was waiting for a seat and collected a little bit of stats and knew that that guy was there. So it's just a really hard thing to know. All right, the Mega Whale left. Our fun exited the building. This video is about to end. Thank you so much for watching as always. I think we're hopefully going to fold the pocket fours at the top right to end the video. Everybody have a great day. See you next week.